thank you, all of you great people at Bússola Tech, for the great work you do to keep us all talking about these things and exploring solutions and new ideas in the parliamentary process. I'm joined by Kirsten Gullickson from the United States House of Representatives, and she is the Director of Systems Analyst and Quality Assurance in the Office of the Clerk at the U.S. House, and by Danilo Augusto Barboza de Aguiar, Chief Legislative Counsel to the Senate of Brazil. And today, as Luis said, the topic is modernization of legislative drafting, but we come to that subject obviously thinking about what we've all been through for the last couple of years, through the pandemic, having to manage legislative processes and crises. We see that in the work that I do. I'm president of Xcential Legislative Technologies, and we work with legislatures around the world to modernize processes of legislative drafting, amending, ratification, and publishing. And we certainly have seen kind of a before and after syndrome with the pandemic, where so many legislatures have had to, during the pandemic, come with really quick solutions to some very big challenges that presented themselves. But then through that process, as we start to emerge, we hope, we're beginning to think about the lessons we've learned. So I think we'll be talking a lot about kind of the before, the during, the after, and then what we're looking at going forward and how we modernize legislative processes, and in particular drafting, amending, and those core processes of legislating. I thought it would be good to start first with just talking about what each of you do daily and what your offices are responsible for. Kirsten, I know your work in the House kind of covers a broad range of things in the clerk's office, and I see you literally running all over the place. And if you could talk about some of the critical things that you are responsible for in your office, and then we can go from there.
Great, thanks, Mark. Thank you, Mark. It is a pleasure to be here. As Mark said, my name is Kirsten Gullickson, and I work in the Office of the Clerk in the U.S. House of Representatives. And the Clerk of the House is an officer whose primary duty is to act as the chief record keeper. And the Clerk's office is a nonpartisan organization, and we provide the procedural assistance and support necessary to conduct the House's business. I'm in our Legislative Computer Systems Division, and we are responsible for the software and hardware support to help do all that operational support. So key is our electronic voting system, which is in the chamber that does the electronic voting system. We also have a legislative information management system that manages all of the metadata and all of the legislative actions surrounding what happens in the chamber, and also what happens around our legislation. So it literally tracks the status of every bill. That information is then transferred over to our partners at the Library of Congress, to the congress.gov website. And so the public and the members and staff can see the status of our bills. And we also send all of the documents over to our government publishing office, which helps us publish those legislative documents, including our congressional record, which is comparable to Hansard or to our debate records, in addition to all the committee documents that are there. Just like all of our colleagues from other parliaments, we faithfully complete our duties within the bounds of our traditions, rules, and precedents of our institution. So in addition, of course, we're talking about legislative drafting as well. So one of the other key components that we manage is the drafting tool that our staff in the Legislative Council uses to draft and turn those our members' ideas into law or into legislative proposals. The work that I get to do most is the data standards around the data formats for our legislative documents. And we might get into talking some of about that today, Mark, but is that a good summary, Mark?
That's perfect, perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Kirsten. Danilo, would you like to talk a bit about what you're responsible for and what your office does for your legislative body?
Okay, Mark, good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Luis Guimard and Bússola Tech, for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you on behalf of the Federal Senate. As you said, I'm the Chief of the Legislative Council. It's an office in the Federal Senate of Brazil that technically supports the members of the Parliament in the different functions and roles they develop in the parliament, so that we support them in drafting amendments and the bills and the other legal documents, and also in the reports in the committees, and everything they need to develop the role in the parliament, they can ask or they can demand from our group. We are about 108 people, technicals in different areas of the knowledge. And we have 22 areas, from education, healthcare, mining, agriculture, constitutional law, defense, and a very diverse group that tries to help the parliament to draft the bills and to clarify any questions or any problem they had to challenge. Also, I'd like to say we have very great impact with the pandemics, and it had a very profound change of our procedures and everything. But I think we will face them in the current of the debate, right? So, like, I think I may have summarized what we have done.
Yeah, I think we will. Thank you. We will be drilling into that deeply as we go along. In fact, maybe I could start with you, Danilo. When you look at your process before the pandemic came and before the crisis came, can you think about where you were most vulnerable? In terms of keeping the process of taking policy and ideas and turning them into law. Where were the points where you were most vulnerable to having challenges? I've seen in some legislatures, still are using, for example, colored pencils to mark up bills and pens, and collaborating by passing documents around literally. Obviously, that had to change. But were there other parts of your process where you just knew there was going to be a problem as the crisis came up?
Okay. In fact, our work was in this counseling work. We had to let me say, the main work of the counseling is in the committees, where the studies and the debates take part with senators that are specialized in some matters, from infrastructure or economic matters and everything. So with the pandemic, we had to move this discussion to the plenary. The plenary was the only space of debates we had during the pandemics. So this had two consequences. One of them, we had a much bigger group to discuss and to get counseling to take part in discussions, and also we had a process that takes faster. The phase of discussion are all summarized, are all concentrated in the plenary, and a very small fraction of time. For example, in the years before, 2015, 16, about 10% of the bills are passed in less than 30 days. Okay, in the 2020, almost half of the bills were passed in only 30 days. So you could imagine the change in the discussion, the council working we had with these numbers. So we had to, and these numbers were achieved only with online tools. So we have the system of deliberation and voting all remote. We only had the speaker in the house. Every other senator were in his offices in the states or in his house. So the work and our work had to be taken online also. So the collaboration between the clerks and the councils and the work to support the senators were everything online also. So the papers and marks and the inside council was take part through the online tools. The senators will use the Zoom for the online, but also they had to have other forms of contact with messages and phone calls to take to have the issues they need to discuss to explain the views or the reports to the other parliaments. Parliament members. So I think the shock, this change, this abrupt change, were a great experience. So because we had to be flexible and be open to our other forms of work that we had to face with the pandemic. I think these were the online council and the small time we had to develop our work was the two biggest challenges we had during the pandemic.
And so you had more work to do. You had to create new ways of doing it completely online. And so you were passing PDFs around, marking them up however you could, all of the things. So you had to invent whole new ways of doing it.
For our form of work with 22 different areas, it's very common to have working with 2 or 3 people from different areas. So we have the need to cooperate more with online tools to elaborate the same documents at the same time. One amendment, the analysis, the description, everything take part in the same time, so that it could deliver to the senator, most of them during the session, not before.
Kirsten, how about on your side? You faced a lot of obviously very similar challenges, and I know that Danilo's counterpart, Wade Ballou, in the Legislative Council, his office had to invent new things along the way. Can you talk a bit about what you had to do?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. It's very similar to what Danilo discussed. But one of our biggest changes was that moving from paper to electronic. So we have been adding a digital layer to our centuries-old paper process for a long time. And so we are on we have a roadmap to do that and to modernize that digital layer as much as we can. We still have to support a paper-based process because the paper is the official document of record, and both officials from the House and the Senate and the President need to sign that official document for it to become law. So we are supporting that while we add this digital layer. And one of the things that we didn't have prior to the pandemic was an electronic submission process. So prior to the pandemic, we had a number of processes where staff or members had to physically show up with a piece of paper and hand it to a staff member in the clerk's office to a clerk, and we would process it. So in those first few weeks, we were directed to make electronic submission processes. And so we stood up 6 secure email solutions that allowed members and staff to submit legislative and non-legislative documents for processing. And I'll talk a little bit about the e-hopper which is a secure email bot-based alternative to a wooden box that we have in our chamber, where members typically submit a physical copy of a bill or resolution or an amendment for the chamber for the what you all would call a plenary session, but for our debates on the chamber floor. So as you know, prior to when our members submit a bill for introduction, they take their idea for a new law, like you said, and work with our attorneys in the House Office of Legislative Counsel to turn that idea into a bill draft. And we have an excellent hearing that happened a couple of weeks ago by our committee on the modernization of Congress, where we had our deputy legal counsel, Noah, talk about the craft of legislative drafting. So, those of you who are draft, you know how it is a special art to turn an idea into legal text. None of the tools that the staff in our Office of House Legislative Counsel that they use to prepare introduction necessarily changed because of the pandemic. The changes that we've been introducing have been in our roadmap. We had some delays because we had to switch to priorities to help respond to the pandemic. But the pandemic has highlighted our dependency on in-person meetings and that paper. So very similar to how you described, we were used to making in-person meetings. We were used to working with the legislative text on paper and doing the strikeouts and the collaboration. And many people do that on email with the PDF. And so luckily, the House was already in the process of making online tools like Zoom and WebEx and Microsoft Teams available. And so when staff couldn't come to the Capitol, couldn't meet in person, they were able to adapt to those virtual meetings and that virtual collaboration fairly quickly. And so it was kind of, I think staff were ready for some of that. Our Capitol complex has 10 buildings, and it's quite, it takes you maybe 15 to 20 minutes to walk from one office to the other. It takes our members that long to walk from their office to the House floor to vote. So I think even just when you're in person, we were ready for this type of meeting, this virtual meeting. So we were able to do it. The other big culture shift that I wanted to mention, Mark, is our committees. Our committees were able to adapt fairly quickly as well. And we have these things now that we call hybrid meetings, where some members and staff may be present at the meeting in the committee meeting room in Washington, D.C., or other members may be attending virtually. And the staff of the committees have figured out how to operate and do the work that they needed within the confines of the House rules and the committee rules. And one of the key benefits, I think, that's going to stay around for a long time is when we have subject matter experts come and be witnesses at our hearings. They now can do that remotely. And that was just not really heard of before the pandemic. And so I think some of the committees missed out on having some really key subject matter experts in their subject matter areas be able to share their testimony, because they just didn't have the ability to do like we are right now, to share information. So
yeah, that's a huge change, and it seems to be sticking too. Danilo, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I totally agree. That ability for any of our parliaments, any of our legislative bodies, whether it's our city council, our state legislatures, and here on the federal level, to engage with subject matter experts remotely, I think it's going to stick, and it's been a big culture shift.
Yeah. Danilo, have you seen the same thing with your committees and taking remote testimony and having hybrid?
Yeah, I think the main change of the function of the Parliament is the remote online tools, especially in the committees. In Brazil, the committees just get back to work in 2021. So the pandemic was a little more in control, and they could bring the president of the committees to the plenary of the committees. But the system was very similar to the plenary. for the remote online voting and discussion, everything online. So they could have the debates and the deliberations in the committees, but just last year. And the public hearings was all remote, and most of the hearings today are still in remote. And it's much more cheap. It doesn't affect the flow of the debate, and everything is functions very properly.
How about go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Getting back to 2020, we have the huge. We had in council, in legislative council, my office. We already have the tools to track and to all the works we made. We have around 10 to 15,000 documents producing by year, and we have to take we have workflow tools and systems to control and to manage all this paper and all these documents online today. But during the pandemics, we had, as I said, much less time to have the works done. In average, we take just one day to elaborate the documents, and 23% of the works were delivered at the same day. It was works that were demanded practically for the same time. And the interesting, 1/4 of these 28% of these works were delivered between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. For the planner the next day, we had to work almost one in 4 works were elaborated during the evening. So I think this information tells a bit of the change and the impact of the pandemic during the first year.
So it really changed how legislation is being written. I mean, it's your, are you simplifying bills, or are bills getting shorter and simpler, or are they getting bigger but just fewer bills? Because I think we've seen in Congress.
Yeah, that's interesting because traditionally the executive branch has a power of agenda to pass his bills and to control the legislative process. But during the pandemics, we have seen a much more active role of the Parliament. The Parliament took lead in a lot of the emergency bills we had to pass. We have especially the economic ones, to support the small business, to support the people with less resources, and everything to help the poor and the people in most difficult situation. And all these legislation were drafted in the Parliament. It didn't come through the executive branch. So we had to work in less time and in a more active, more complex bills than we had before. It was a real challenge to face
Kirsten, you've seen similar kinds of changes in the nature of the bills that are coming in.
Yeah, this started prior to the pandemic, but we really saw it very similar to what you're describing. Our bills are getting bigger and bigger and more complex, and the range of subject matter in the bills is getting very diverse. And luckily, it hasn't caused our technical systems that much headache, because they're getting larger, but 3,000-4,000 pages of text, and that's when it's on single space in what we call the enrolled bill. The bill that's passed doesn't have the spacing. So up until the enrollment, all of our legislative text has page and line numbers on it, and traditional space so that you can write that amendment right in there, you know, strike out 1,000, put in 2,000, strike out green, put in red, and there's still that space to do that traditional manual editing. So when we talk about a final bill that space is closed up and that's 2,000 or 3,000 pages, well then the original text is close to 3,000 or 4,000 pages because of that extra space, and it takes a lot for folks to ingest that, to read it, and so when it's in paper, it's hard, right, to shuffle it around. When it's in PDF, it's just the paper on screen. And so we really try to take advantage of XML and XML display to make sure that staff can see it online on congress.gov or at our govinfo.gov and really be able to work with it and manipulate it. One of our remaining challenges is that there are a couple places, because we have House rules that say that the text has to be available before the debate. Sometimes if they haven't had time to slam all the different versions together in the electronic copy, they will take different versions of the printed copy, make the final version, and then scan it and post it right away while people are still processing and making that XML version and that completed PDF. And so there are places both in the House's process and the Senate's process that we don't have that rich PDF that is searchable, or we have an XML version that is usable. And so we're still trying to clean up or try to figure out how we can get that process working. But when the legislative process is sped up and we're as you described, basically working 24/7, sometimes there's not a lot of opportunity to stop and put hands on keyboard and do that work, especially if they can do paper. So it's a big challenge.
It is, but it strikes me, Kirsten, as you describe it, the way the U.S. House is, Congress, parts of it are very, very modern, using XML, thinking about data, thinking about how data can be structured in certain ways so that applications can be built around it. But then other parts are not very modern, and really paper driven, and how something appears in the paper. Can you talk a little more about how I think you've described some of what you're having to do to ride between those two ways of doing things, but you're developing new applications around that.
Correct. We are really trying to build new applications that allow for staff, whether that is a drafter or whether that's a committee staffer or leadership staffer or just, anyone along the workflow, that they can create that legislative text in XML. We're not there yet. The tool that we use for drafting that legislative text is highly complex. It's a trained attorney, a trained drafter needs to know how to use it. A trained clerk who might be preparing the House pass version or the final House and Senate pass version need to be highly skilled to use it. So we are exploring efforts to try to bring in tools where we can get that text in XML faster in those places where the staff are still relying on the paper and scanning in the paper. It's a few spots, but I think this is the challenge of some of our parliament, some of our legislative organizations, where we have been paper for so long, and then coupled we're a bicameral institution, so we have to have both chambers agree. So that's a unique challenge. If we were unicameral, I think we would be some of these modernizations would have happened faster, but just the very challenge of getting the two chambers to agree sometimes is just an institutional challenge. So adding that digital layer and making sure that you've got it all away along your workflows and for all the different various places, that's a challenge.
Danilo, can you talk about how you're writing between your systems that I know still are very paper oriented and digital modernization? Can you talk about some of the systems you're your drafters and your team actually uses during this, and kind of how you ride through between paper and digital and so forth. Oops, I think you're still on mute.
Okay. Yeah, I confess we have a very paper-oriented work still, based on the Microsoft Office and the editing tools we use for everything. But we have two experience with authoring systems for drafting. One of them designed just to requirements, I think, requests. It's the small legal documents just to appeal to the table to have something, public hearing, a change in the order of the bills to be passed, and this tool was developed by the Senate, and today is the only form to present a request. You have to use this tool to draft this document. But every other documents we still use the Microsoft Office. But the experience with this tool is stimulated to do a tool we were developing right now, but it's not already done, to draft bills. So the authoring system to draft the bills, a complete system to drafting. When this is working, it will be much faster and much reliable the result of the work, because we can connect the different acts we have to change, or the different how the articles and paragraphs relate to them, and this will be a great modernization of legal drafting when it's done. The pandemic didn't change the way we work in the drafting itself, just with the collaboration with the other colleagues, but the tools are the same basically, but we are stimulated to develop these new tools to do drafting and authoring systems.
Have you, and with these new tools you're working on now, I'm sure they're being shaped by the experiences you've had. Are your members of the Parliament themselves, are their expectations changing for what your office can do? I know Kirsten and the team there have had to deal with different expectations and different demands from the members through this process. Have you seen a change now that you're having to deal with as well?
Okay. Yes, I think the form of the way we work during the pandemics changed the way we relate to the members of the Parliament. Also, I have to recognize they were very flexible and disposable to adopt the new tools of the vote and deliberating. We have in March 2020, we have the first online voting, and every member of the Federal Senate was able to vote, and they wanted it, and they voted. So they adopt the technology and the tools with a very enthusiasm. So the same enthusiasm to have online meetings with us and to ask and to get a relation more regular and more frequent. So but also the timing, these numbers we had, the works being done in one day, the same day, also demands the elevated expectations of the regular work of we are almost in a normal situation or about the pandemics, but the rhythm of the discussions, the bills, and the are the same. So yes, we have to find ways to keep this form of work after the pandemics, to face the demands and to face the expectations of the Parliament.
Kirsten, I think you've had to deal with changing expectations as well. Plus, and I think the hearing you referenced of the Modernization Committee, which your colleague Noah talked about the challenge of what bill drafting really is about. It seems there have been some expectations that have been set differently.
I don't know. Some of it is different expectations, but we also, from the clerk's office perspective, we have seen an increase in the number of bills that are being introduced. And so one of the things that we're trying to analyze is it because they now have an electronic submission, and so it's easier for them to get their product over. And so because of that increase, our counsel's office has seen an increase in work and amount of drafts, because they draft a lot more different versions of a legislative text than what may get introduced. And so for every 5 bills, they may have produced 15 or 20 different versions of those 5 bills for the member, or maybe we did work collaboratively and made revisions to that draft text before it gets into the formal stream. My question about the increase in introduced bills is because of the pandemic and because of social distancing and risk aversion, and we have 435 members, and did they lose opportunity to coalition build? So where maybe 1 or 2 or 3 members might sponsor a bill together and work on it together to introduce it, did they then just work on those ideas separately because they didn't have as much opportunity in 2020 and even 2021 to build coalitions? I think it's hard to gauge. I'll look for the political scientists who study Congress to weigh in on some of that aspects. But that's my own personal observation, is we're seeing members want to have their name on the legislation. They want to be first. They lost opportunity to collaborate with their colleagues on shared ideas, and so they went to the Leg Council and they both asked for similar bills, and they come to us for introduction. And but yeah, so the expectations on being able to keep the same turnaround and be able to produce an increased amount of work with the same amount of staff, that definitely is one of our new expectations.
So I guess in the time we have remaining, perhaps we should turn toward the future and thinking about the kind of processes, the kind of systems that we all like to see in the future, and different, perhaps the beginning of some new traditions, not just technologically, but ways that we can have systems that are more sustainable, that continue to build more confidence in the public in our institutions. Danilo, it sounds like you're starting to build a little bit of new tools, but in a broader sense, are you thinking about kind of how you'd really like it to be, and the kind of systems and the kind of processes you'd really like to have going forward, thinking about the lessons you've learned about how they also need to be able to work through a crisis? You have some thoughts about that?
Okay. First, I'd like to get a point that Kirsten have said that the remote tools were necessary and were very useful to attend the emergence of the pandemic, but also it takes difficult to share thoughts, to working together in the parliaments, and the bills that were passed. They would be better bills if they were together and they were sitting around the table and could discuss better the text. So I think that the challenge is to keep the technology, keep the online tools, and but the priority should be the quality of the legislation, quality of drafting, and the quality of the debates. So I think the future will have to in the future. I think, I hope, or I see mixed and online tools for public hearings, for debates that of bills that are not very complex, or not very complex. But the debate, the personal debate, the alliance, and the filibusters, and all the things they is necessary for the process of the legislative will take will be in presence, and will be local, in the plenary, local plenaries, let's say. And I think that but also I think that the experience of the online vote, and the online certification, and online documents, I think these will be they remain in the future. I think we had Brazil is a big country. The parliaments comes from all around the place, with different background and different technology relations technology. So they were in the past, they were very some of them critical to the technology. They prefer the paperwork, but now they are all convinced that the technology is useful and is necessary, since it doesn't make difficult the debate, or make difficult the alliance, and the drafting itself. So I think that the future will be some balance in technology and the tradition. This is my view.
Thank you. You wonder too, as your members are getting used to not having paper and it being online, you know, as we all know, so many legislative processes are driven by how something looks on a piece of paper. It might be a PDF, but just how it appears and how the typefaces are, and so forth. Do you see that beginning to change a little bit, or perhaps we begin to think more about the information than the appearance on a piece of paper?
I think it's the same. It's the same logic as I said. Our work is much of the time writing reports, write amendments, write for the senators. But I think the work of council is much more than this. It's also it needs also a conversation, and to be with, to talk to them. And I think we have to balance the online participation, online work, and the work with them, and supporting them inside, supporting them during the debates. I think we have to think in a manner to balance these both sides of the equation.
What are your thoughts on this as you think toward the future, and some of the things you hope to retain, and some of the things you hope to build for the future?
Yeah, these are good questions. So I know that we have some paper processes that I think need to stay. So we have some quality assurance spots where we do proof the bill. We make sure that we in the clerk's office are producing that final version of legislation that represents exactly what the members of Congress voted on. And we do a lot of that on paper, in person, because, you know, to this day, proofreading is sometimes still best on paper. Having said that, there's a whole host of tools that we could add to help on the drafting end, particularly with that collaboration. So if a member does want to collaborate not on paper with their attorney and their drafter. We need to build tools that do that. Right now, we don't really have them. For the rest of the business world, we do it. We do it through Google Docs. We can do it through Microsoft Word. We have wonderful tools where, I can go in and edit a business document, and you all could see my edits, and I can see yours, and we can have discussion right there in the comments. We need to move some of those features into the drafting world, and not have them necessarily marking up a PDF. It's very cumbersome. So I'm hoping we can do that. We still need to be very sensitive in our workflow that we do want that legislative text into machine readable format, and we're using a standard called United States Legislative Markup, which we're moving to. It uses both the international standard called Akominotoso or Legal Doc ML. I know there's a number of parliaments out there that are also using Akominotoso. And so I think we still need to be sensitive to that. Along that workflow, we need to get that legislative text into XML. There's a number of my colleagues in the legislative branch. Number might be too many. There's a handful of my colleagues who would love to redo how our bills look, and how our committee reports and our hearing documents look. Most of them are, well, all of them are designed to be read after they've been printed and after they've been bound. And some of them are, kept the same size because we have 50, 60, 75 years of printing them, and they fit on a library bookshelf. So we still need to preserve the paper, right? Our National Archives tells us the best way to preserve any document is on paper, right? And we all are trying to still figure out how do you keep the text from the 50s, 60s, and 70s alive so you can read documents on microfiche, and we could talk all about that. So we still need to caretake for the paper. We still need to have paper output, but does it need to be primary anymore? Can we have the digital layer be primary and just have that secondary layer that caretakes for the paper that we know we need to do? Because we look at documents from 50, 75 years ago. Some of our laws on the federal level, they were created back then, and it's still current law. So we need to take care of it. So whether or not we'll be able to change how our bills are drafted and how we do it, it's a heavy lift. And most of you may not know, but we don't have a single unified code or one single unified set, printable set of laws. We drafted two versions. One is the United States Code, and then one is to what we call statute compilations. And it's incredibly challenging for those members who come, and staff who might have come from state legislatures who have a single unified code, or the bill looks like attracts changes, where the bill is, strike 1,000, insert 5,000, and that's what you're voting on. We're voting on the text on page 5, line 3, strike 1,000, insert, strike 1,000, insert 5,000. So we'll see.
But you're right. The question is, does it still need to be on the same size of paper? Still need to have the same typeface, the same as always, because so often that drives everything going backwards.
Right.
To get to that.
Right. And I can't predict when we'll do it, or when there will be the opportunity or even the appetite to make those types of changes. When you look at the generation, the age of the members of the House and Senate, we are still being represented by a generation of folks who are used to paper, and even me as a Gen Xer, right? I learned how to work on paper first and digital. So, and the majority of the members are older than I am. So we have a heavy lift to move to make the paper not primary.
Danilo, are you seeing always when we think about modernization and think about making things work better, We can have great ideas, but it does come down to paying for them and for funding and for getting it done. I know in our experience working with governments, often the legislative technology people they pretty much always do amazing things to make the older technology systems keep working and going along, even though some of the technology can be 10 years, 20 years, or 40 years old. But often their hard work results in the legislature thinking things are fine because they've made that old system look like it's very modern. But underneath it all, there's some COBOL, some Fortran, there's some very old systems. But we're starting to see, at least in the state legislative side in the US, we're beginning to do some funding for new projects and beginning to recognize that through the crisis, we need to pay for things to improve them. Are you seeing that at all in Brazil, either in your parliament or elsewhere in the country?
Yeah. In fact, in Federal Senate, they have a very solid background, technology background. Can you hear me? All the systems, it's interesting because as a legislative, it doesn't do things that any other place do. We don't have we have to develop our own tools, drafting tools, but also the tools to keep the documents and to work the flow of the procedures. So we had since the 60s, and we had to develop the systems and the electronic and the informational systems we had to use. But yes, it's a work in progress because we have to be continuous perfectioning and to develop new tools and we have to use these moments of crisis to make choice and take the experience. And with this experience, we had to look at the future. Specifically about the remote system of deliberation discussing, it's interesting because we could put in work in just 1 week to 10 weeks. We were the first parliament to have the online vote working. But why? Because a year before, in 2018, we have a strike of the truck drivers, and the country was collapsed, and we couldn't make the plenary to work because the most of the parliaments couldn't come to Brasília to federal district. So after it takes about 5 to 6 days, and then everything was solved. But we see the need to have a tool to make online vote. So the project started there. So when we faced the pandemics, we almost have all the design and everything we could put to work about 10 to 15 days. It was so I think we have to learn with the pandemics for the next opportunity you have to face. So the technology and the drafting tools and everything is here, and we have to use the better way possible.
It's funny how the traditional modernization projects for legislatures, for government, have been big projects, 4, 5, 6 year projects. We, in a waterfall way, we design a whole new system, and it takes forever. It takes millions and millions of dollars, and that method generally doesn't work very well at the end. It's high risk, but it seems that the pandemic has pushed governments to really do more agile development and think about how do we solve this little problem, we can fix that and move to the next. And Kirsten, it seems that really has been the methodology the clerk's office and your team have done all along, which is to sort of take it step by step, see if this works, and then try something else. Is that, have I got that about right?
Yeah, so from the majority of our projects, we have adopted, and even when we were in waterfall, we were kind of agile in some respects that we took off, you know, some of it sometimes because of resources, sometimes because of time, we chunked off just the smallest bit that we could do and deliver the minimal viable product. And we continue to do that. And then our backlog is pretty extensive at this point, but we are delivering product that our members can use in pretty quickly. And I love hearing the story of Brazil in the remote voting, that you had this project going on for years and years. So the policy, it sounds like the policy questions about letting members vote remotely was kind of solved before you actually had to put the system in. Because that's some of our challenges is we know we can, you know, as a technical shop, we can deliver almost whatever they ask for, but we need people and money and time. And once they decide on the policy questions, right, and making these rules changes or changes in precedent is sometimes a big deal, and it takes leadership a long time to decide to do something. And so I'm glad to hear that it sounds like you all solved that policy question in the policy questions around remote voting before you had to actually implement it. And so it was just that once you needed it, they were like, we're good. These decisions we made or these things we talked about, we're good. And we're from our standpoint in the House, we don't have all those questions quite answered yet about remote voting. So we implemented proxy voting. So the two members have to talk and they have to decide, oh, I'm not going to be in Washington, but can you proxy vote for me? And so then we have this a pretty detailed procedure where they can send a letter in and say, Mark's going to vote for Kirsten. And then when Mark is in the chamber and the vote's going on, he has to, you know, speak and say, I told him to vote yay or nay for me. And then there's procedures to do it, but we haven't implemented remote voting. So proxy voting.
Almost.
Almost.
Well, looking at the clock, we're just about out of time. This has been great. Danilo, either of you, any last thoughts before we close the session out?
No, just to thank you. Sorry. Just to thank you, everyone. Say I learned a lot with the Kirsten and Mark Stodder. I hope we keep in touch for other events, other seminars, and to change experience. I hope we don't have this kind of prize in the future, but I'm sure we have the opportunity to develop new tools and to keep technology first. And it's very rich and interesting to talk to people from other parliaments. And so I hope we'll be together soon. Thank you very much.
Okay. Kirsten?
I agree. Thank you for the conversation. And I know that we have shared challenges and that we just need to identify them, and then we can help. Maybe one solution in one parliament will help another parliament solve their challenges, because as we discussed, some of these are not easy. And so, but the sentiment is the same. Good conversation. Thank you for inviting me. And Mark, thank you for leading us.
Well, thank you both. And yes, I agree completely. This is exactly why we're doing these sessions, so we can have the ideas going back and forth and sharing these experiences and learning how to get a bit better about what we're trying to do for our governments and for our citizens. So thank you both. And thank you again to Bússola Tech for hosting this session.